I had been waiting for weeks for that invitation, the one to my father's 70th birthday, the big event that everyone in Lusaka was talking about. It was supposed to bring the whole Campbell family together again at the estate, filled with music, laughter, and all the luxury we were known for. But as the days passed, no letter came, no call, nothing. I finally picked up the phone and called my brother, Chanda. The moment he answered, I could already hear the smugness in his voice. When I asked about the party, he laughed lightly and said, "Only for family," before hanging up. Just like that. His words hit me harder than I expected. I sat there, holding the phone, staring at the wall. How could he say that? I was the eldest daughter, the one who had helped build everything they now took pride in. Yet somehow, I had become the outsider. That night, I sat by my window, looking out at the city lights. The world felt cold and small, but deep inside, something burned, not sadness, not jealousy, but quiet determination. If they wanted to forget me, let them. Because one day soon, they'd have no choice but to remember who I was. I promised myself that the next time they said, "family," my name would be the first that came to mind, not the last. And when that day came, they'd finally understand just how big of a mistake they'd made. Growing up, everyone called my brother Chanda the Golden Son. From the moment he could walk, my father had him sitting in meetings, shaking hands with business partners, and learning how to run the Campbell empire. He wore little suits while I was told to sit quietly in the corner. When guests visited, my parents would proudly talk about how smart and capable he was, how he would one day take over the family business. I was there too, smiling politely, holding trays, taking notes, doing everything behind the scenes, invisible but essential. Chanda loved the spotlight, and I didn't mind it at first. I liked being the one who solved problems quietly, the one who made things actually work. When numbers didn't add up or deals were falling apart, it was me who stayed up late fixing everything. But no one ever noticed. When our father started getting sick, things began to change. Chanda officially took charge of the business, though in reality, he had no idea what he was doing. He made speeches, signed papers, and smiled for cameras while I stayed in the background, doing all the real work. I was the one who saved contracts, convinced investors to stay, and restructured departments to keep us from collapsing. But every success was announced as Chanda's great leadership. My mother would pat my arm gently and say, "You're too emotional to handle business, dear. Let your brother lead." Those words cut deep. They didn't see that it wasn't emotion holding me back, it was their blindness. So, I left quietly. I didn't fight or argue. I packed my things and walked away from the company I had helped build. While they were busy celebrating Chanda's achievements, I started something of my own. With the little savings I had, I built a small transport company. It began with just 2 trucks, but I worked harder than I ever had before. I called clients personally, drove to border posts myself, and made sure every deal was airtight. Slowly, that small idea grew. Within a few years, my company was operating across 3 countries, moving goods faster and cheaper than anyone else. I registered it under a name no one in my family would recognize, Nkongolo Freight Holdings. By the time the business was stable, I had more than I ever dreamed of: warehouses, contracts, loyal staff, and respect I had earned all on my own. And while Chanda was busy showing off at family parties and pretending to be the perfect heir, I was quietly becoming something much greater. He had the name, but I had the power. No one knew that the woman they had dismissed, the daughter they had forgotten, was now running one of the fastest growing logistics networks in the region. I didn't need their validation anymore. I was building my own legacy, and when the time came, they would see it too. The night of the party finally arrived, and the whole city seemed to be talking about it. News channels called it the most exclusive family gathering of the year. The Campbell mansion sparkled like a palace, filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Politicians, CEOs, and celebrities lined up to take pictures at the grand entrance, all eager to be seen at the event of the season. The chandeliers glowed like stars, the tables overflowed with gold-rimmed plates and fresh flowers, and everyone there looked like they belonged to another world, my world, the one I had been pushed out of. I watched it all from a distance at first, reading the live updates online. My name wasn't on the guest list, but that didn't mean I wasn't going to show up. Inside, Chanda stood on the stage, his voice booming through the speakers. He wore a designer suit and that same fake smile he always saved for cameras. "Tonight," he said, raising his glass, "we celebrate family, legacy, and the future of Cambale Logistics." The crowd clapped and cheered, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As he basked in their applause, a black SUV rolled to a stop outside the mansion gates. The photographers rushed over, their flashes lighting up the driveway. Everyone turned to see who had arrived so late. Slowly, the car door opened, and I stepped out. The air seemed to freeze for a moment. I wore a long emerald green gown, the same one my mother once said I'd never be able to afford. The fabric shimmered under the lights as I walked toward the entrance. The guards hesitated, unsure of what to do. But before they could stop me, I smiled politely and kept walking. Every eye in the room turned as I entered the grand hall. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. My mother's hand, holding a glass of champagne, trembled. Chanda's confident grin faded as he saw me approaching. I didn't rush or speak. I simply walked with calm, steady steps through the crowd that parted in silence. People whispered, some pretending not to stare, others openly gaping. It was as if a ghost had walked in, the daughter they had erased suddenly standing in the center of their perfect celebration. The same chandeliers I once helped choose reflected above me, glittering like proof that I had every right to be there. I stopped at the edge of the stage where Chanda stood frozen. "Surprised to see me?" I asked softly, loud enough for only him to hear. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Don't worry," I said, "I didn't come for drama. I came for family." The music had stopped. The room was silent. Cameras began to click again, and I could almost feel the shift in the air, the beginning of a night no one would ever forget. As I walked deeper into the hall, the sound of my heels echoed across the marble floor. Every conversation stopped. Whispers spread like wildfire, and I could feel hundreds of eyes following me. My mother froze mid-toast, her glass of champagne trembling in her hand. Chanda's face turned stiff, the confident smile he'd worn all night slowly fading into a scowl. The air felt heavy, thick with confusion and shock. I reached the long dining table where my father sat at the head, looking frail but proud in his tailored suit. His eyes softened the moment he saw me, as if he wasn't sure whether I was real or just a memory. Before anyone could say a word, Chanda stormed toward me. "You weren't invited," he hissed, his voice low but sharp enough for nearby guests to hear. I smiled, calm and collected, and replied softly, "I know." Then, with steady hands, I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small velvet envelope. The deep red fabric gleamed under the lights. I placed it gently on my father's plate. "But Dad deserves to see what real family looks like." The room went completely silent. Even the orchestra in the corner stopped playing. My father looked at the envelope, then at me. Slowly, with shaking hands, he opened it. Inside was a document, thick paper stamped and sealed. He lifted it carefully, adjusting his glasses as his eyes moved across the page. Then he froze. For a moment, he didn't breathe. Chanda stepped closer, trying to peek at the paper, his confidence slipping with every second of silence. Finally, my father looked up, his expression a mix of shock and pride. He turned the document for everyone to see. "This," he said quietly, "is the official deed transferring 51% of Cambale Logistics." The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Chanda's eyes widened in disbelief. My father's voice grew stronger. "And it belongs," he continued, his gaze shifting to me, "to Nkongolo Freight Holdings. The room erupted in whispers. A few people immediately realized what that meant, that Nkongolo Freight Holdings was mine. Chanda's jaw dropped. "This is a joke," he said, his voice shaking. "You can't be serious, Dad. You gave her control of our company?" My mother looked between us, speechless. My father didn't flinch. "No, son," he said firmly. "I gave it to the one who earned it." I stood there, calm as ever, while cameras flashed and guests exchanged stunned looks. Chanda's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. I could almost hear his pride cracking. All I said was, "I told you, I came for family." The silence that followed was electric, heavy, unforgettable. For years, they had cut me off, treated me like I didn't belong. But now, standing there in that glittering hall, every eye on me, I had finally taken back what was mine. Not through revenge or rage, but with proof, power, and quiet grace. For a few long seconds, the room stood completely still. The only sound was the soft, uneasy music from the orchestra slowly fading away as everyone tried to understand what had just happened. You could almost feel the tension pressing against the walls. My father sat there holding the document, the papers shaking slightly in his trembling hands. The glow from the chandelier reflected off his glasses, and I could see tears beginning to form in his tired eyes. Chanda, however, was anything but calm. His face turned bright red, and his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "This is illegal," he suddenly shouted, his voice cracking through the silence. "You tricked him into this. You used him while he's sick." His anger filled the room like thunder. Guests began to murmur. Some looked uncomfortable, others leaned in, desperate not to miss a second of what was quickly becoming the most dramatic moment of the night. My mother's face had gone pale. She reached out to calm Chanda, but he brushed her hand away, still shaking with rage. Before I could say a single word, my father's voice rose above the chaos, soft but powerful. "No, son," he said, each word slow and deliberate. The hall went silent again. "I signed this myself." His eyes moved from Chanda to me. "She's the only one who kept the family legacy alive." The truth in his voice was undeniable. The man who had once doubted me, who had chosen my brother over me, was now defending me in front of everyone. Cameras flashed from every corner of the hall, capturing the moment. Journalists whispered to each other, realizing they were witnessing the story of the year. I could feel the shift in the room. All those people who had once ignored me were now looking at me with awe, maybe even respect. Chanda's mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but no one spoke up for him. Even his closest friends looked away. The power he once held was gone, slipping right through his fingers. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath, his voice breaking. I stayed quiet, standing tall beside my father. There was nothing left for me to prove. Everything I had worked for, every late night, every moment of being dismissed, it had all led to this exact second. The same family that had shut me out was now watching as I reclaimed my place, not with anger, but with dignity. My father looked up at me and smiled faintly, pride shining through his tears. "You did well," he whispered. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Around us, the guests started clapping softly, hesitant at first, then louder. The sound filled the hall like a wave, washing away years of silence. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Chanda's face was burning red, his hands shaking with rage. Everyone in the room could feel the storm building inside him. He had always been the golden boy, the one used to getting his way, and now, in front of the entire city's elite, his world was crumbling. My father had just declared me the rightful heir, and Chanda simply couldn't handle it. He slammed his hand on the table so hard that glasses rattled and wine spilled across the white cloth. "This is all your fault," he shouted, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "You only care because she found out about the offshore accounts." The words hung in the air like smoke. The entire room went silent again, even quieter than before. You could hear someone drop a fork on the other side of the hall. I froze where I stood, my heart suddenly pounding. Offshore accounts? I didn't need to say a word, the damage was already done. My father's head turned sharply toward him, his expression dark and confused. What accounts? He asked, his voice calm but cold enough to make everyone hold their breath. Chanda's lips moved, but nothing came out. He realized too late what he'd just revealed. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a way out, but there was none. My father slowly stood up, his hands still trembling but his voice steady. Chanda, he said, what have you done? Panic filled Chanda's face. It's not what you think, he blurted, stammering. I was just moving money around, for security, for the company. But the lie was weak, and everyone knew it. Guests started whispering, cameras began flashing again, and the sound of murmurs filled the air like a rising tide. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears forming in her eyes. My father's voice shook with both fury and heartbreak. You stole from your own family, he said. You betrayed everything I built. Chanda tried to speak again, but his voice cracked, his excuses falling apart before they even began. I stood silently, watching the man who had mocked and dismissed me unravel completely in front of everyone. I didn't need to defend myself. He was doing all the work for me. Then my father turned to me. His eyes, though filled with pain, were gentle. Is this true? He asked softly. I nodded once. I found the trail months ago, I said quietly. But I wanted you to hear it from him. The room gasped again. Some guests shook their heads, others whispered in disbelief. Chanda's shoulders slumped. The man who once stood tall with arrogance now looked small, defeated, and terrified. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair, muttering to himself. My father took a deep breath and said the words that ended it all. Get out, he said simply. And just like that, years of lies, pride, and betrayal came crashing down. Chanda had destroyed himself with one careless confession, and the empire he thought was his slipped right through his fingers. The party that had started as a grand celebration had turned into something no one would ever forget. The chandeliers still glowed, the music had stopped, and the scent of spilled wine lingered in the air. Guests whispered in small groups, unsure whether to leave or stay. Chanda sat slumped in a chair, his head in his hands, his once perfect suit now wrinkled and stained. My father stood quietly by the table, still holding the deed I had given him. His expression was calm but heavy, the kind of calm that only comes after heartbreak. Minutes later, flashing blue and red lights appeared outside the mansion gates. The sound of police sirens cut through the tense silence. Everyone turned toward the entrance as uniformed officers walked in. My father straightened his shoulders, his face pale but steady. I'm the one who called, he said firmly. The officers nodded and moved toward Chanda. For a moment, Chanda looked up at them in disbelief, as if still expecting someone to protect him. You can't do this, he shouted. This is my father's house. This is my night. But no one moved. The crowd had gone quiet again, watching as the golden son of the Campbell family was handcuffed right there in front of everyone. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. His voice cracked as he shouted, You're all making a mistake. He struggled, but the officers held him firmly. My mother covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't look at me. She couldn't look at anyone. As they led Chanda out, his eyes met mine, full of anger, confusion, and something close to regret. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all the times he'd told me I didn't belong, how he'd stolen what I worked for, and how he'd used our father's trust for greed. Choices have consequences, and this was his. When the doors finally closed behind him, the noise faded, leaving only silence and the faint hum of whispers. My father sank into his chair, his face tired but peaceful. I walked over and knelt beside him. His hand trembled as he reached for mine. "You didn't just save the company," he whispered weakly. "You saved the family." His eyes glistened with pride, but there was also sadness, the kind that comes from realizing love and loyalty don't always live in the same heart. I smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "No, Dad," I said. "I just reminded them who family really is." For a long time, we sat there quietly. The guests began to leave one by one, and the mansion that had been filled with laughter now stood heavy with truth. Outside, the night was calm again. The flashing lights were gone, the noise had faded, and for the first time in years, I felt like the house finally belonged to someone who deserved it. A week later, the mansion felt completely different. The noise, the tension, and the chaos were gone. For the first time in years, the halls were quiet, peaceful. I stood on the wide balcony overlooking the gardens, the morning sun spilling gold across the estate. The same house that once made me feel small and unwanted was now mine. Every wall, every light, every inch of this place carried memories, some painful, some powerful. I took a deep breath, letting the cool breeze brush against my face. It felt like the whole world had shifted, and finally, I was standing where I belonged. Inside, the staff moved calmly, no more whispers or worried glances. My father was resting peacefully in his room, recovering slowly but smiling more each day. The business was back in safe hands, and the family name, once tangled in lies, had a chance to rebuild. I poured myself a glass of champagne, the bubbles rising softly to the surface. Holding it up toward the morning light, I couldn't help but smile. "Only for family," I whispered, the same cruel words my brother had once thrown at me. Except now, they carried a new meaning. Not about blood or names, but about loyalty, love, and truth. The irony was almost too sweet. I took a slow sip, letting the moment sink in. Sometimes, revenge doesn't come from anger or shouting. It comes from peace, from knowing you built something so strong that even those who once shut you out now have to ask to be let in. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in gold, I smiled to myself. I hadn't just won back the family name. I had rewritten what it meant.